Get that piece of junk off my range before it explodes in your face. Sergeant Derek Mason's voice cut through the morning air like a whip crack, his finger jabbing toward the battered Mosin Nagant rifle slung across the woman's shoulder. The other soldiers at Fort Carson's elite sniper range turned to stare, some chuckling at the sight of the scarred woman with her ancient weapon. Her face, the left side melted and twisted by old burns, remained expressionless as she set down the weathered rifle case with deliberate care. "Ma'am, this is a precision shooting facility, not a museum," Mason continued, his voice dripping with contempt as he strutted closer, chest puffed out with authority. "That Soviet relic belongs in a history book, not on my range." The woman's gloved fingers paused on the leather strap of her case. Something in the way she moved, controlled, measured, like a predator conserving energy, made Private Elena Ross shift uncomfortably. "I have authorization," the woman said quietly, her accent carrying traces of something Eastern European. She pulled out a crumpled day pass, the kind given to civilian contractors. Mason snatched it, pretended to study it, then let it flutter to the ground. "Authorization or not, you're a safety hazard," he declared loudly enough for the entire range to hear. "Take your garage sale special and get out." But as the woman bent to retrieve her pass, her scarred hand steady despite the humiliation, Mason's jaw tightened. Something about her voice, about the way she moved. But the scars on her face weren't the only thing that 8 years had buried beneath layers of ash. If you're already feeling that burn of injustice watching someone with battle scars being dismissed and humiliated, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. These aren't just stories. They're reminders that the most dangerous people in the room are often the ones everyone underestimates. Now, let's return to Fort Carson, where Vera is about to show them why some legends never truly die. The woman who called herself Vera straightened slowly, her movements deliberate as pond water. She'd driven 600 miles through the night to stand on this particular patch of Colorado earth, carrying nothing but the rifle that had saved her life more times than the scars on her body could count. The Mosin Nagant looked like it had crawled out of a World War II grave, its wooden stock weathered and cracked, the metal worn smooth by countless hands, the leather sling held together by determination more than material. "Look at this," Mason called out to the gathering crowd of soldiers, his voice carrying that particular brand of cruelty reserved for those who needed an audience. "Someone's grandmother thinks she can play soldier with Grandpa's deer rifle." The laughter came easily from the younger troops, sharp and dismissive. They saw what Mason wanted them to see, a damaged woman clinging to obsolete equipment, probably some war widow trying to feel close to a dead husband. Private Ross watched from her position near the ammunition shed, something cold settling in her stomach. She'd been at Fort Carson for only 3 months, but she'd learned to read people quickly. The scarred woman wasn't flinching at the mockery. Her breathing hadn't changed. Her hands remained perfectly still. These weren't the reactions of someone being humiliated. These were the reactions of someone waiting. "Sergeant Mason," the woman spoke again, her accent dancing around the edges of her words like smoke. "I've paid for range time. I'd like to use it." Mason stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the coffee and arrogance on his breath. "Listen carefully," he said, dropping his voice to that fake intimate tone bullies use when they want to seem reasonable. "I don't care if you paid. I don't care if you drove here from Russia with that antique. This is a military installation, and we have standards. That rifle hasn't been field-worthy since Kennedy was president." The morning sun caught the worst of her scars as she tilted her head slightly, considering him. The left side of her face looked like melted wax that had been resculpted by someone working from memory rather than sight. The damage ran from her hairline down her neck, disappearing beneath the collar of her worn field jacket. Whatever had done that to her had been hot enough to turn flesh into something else entirely. "The rifle is maintained," she said simply. "It will shoot." Staff Sergeant Rita Chen materialized from the range office, her clipboard held like a weapon and her expression suggesting she'd rather be anywhere else. "Civilian range time doesn't start until 1400 hours, she announced, not bothering to look at the scarred woman directly. "You'll need to clear the area until then." But Vera didn't move. Instead, she knelt beside her rifle case with the kind of economy of motion that made Mason's left eye twitch. Her hands worked the clasps with practiced efficiency, revealing the Mosin Nagant nestled in foam that had been carefully cut to accommodate every curve of the ancient weapon. She lifted it with the reverence reserved for religious artifacts or loaded weapons, her scarred fingers finding their positions with unconscious precision. Ross noticed it first, the way the woman's breathing changed as she handled the rifle. 4 counts in, 7 counts held, 8 counts out. It was subtle, the kind of thing you'd miss unless you'd been trained to observe, the kind of breathing pattern they taught in advanced marksmanship schools, the kind that turned humans into weapons platforms. "Put it away," Mason ordered, but something in his voice had changed. A note of uncertainty had crept in, like a violin slightly out of tune in an otherwise perfect orchestra. He rubbed absently at a scar on his wrist, an old habit he'd developed years ago. "I said, put it away." Vera stood slowly, the rifle held in a casual, low, ready position that looked accidental but wasn't. "1 magazine," she said, meeting his eyes for the first time. "I'll shoot 1 magazine, then I'll leave." The challenge hung in the air like cordite. Mason couldn't back down now, not with 30 soldiers watching, not with his reputation as the toughest instructor at Fort Carson on the line, but something was crawling up his spine, a recognition his conscious mind hadn't quite caught up to yet. The way she moved, the accent that wasn't quite Russian, wasn't quite anything. The 4-7-8 breathing pattern. "Fine," he spat. 1 magazine, 5 rounds. But when you can't hit paper at 100 yards with that relic, you're gone. And I mean gone. Don't come back. From his position in the observation tower, Colonel James Mitchell adjusted his binoculars, his weathered hands steady despite the arthritis that plagued him on cold mornings. He'd been watching since the woman arrived, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the way she'd parked her beat-up truck in the exact spot that provided the best sight lines to all exits. Maybe it was the rifle case that looked older than sin but had been maintained with obsessive care. Or maybe it was the fact that he'd been waiting 8 years for this particular ghost to materialize. Vera walked to the firing line with measured steps, each foot placement deliberate and sure. The other shooters had stopped their own practice to watch, drawn by the spectacle Mason had created. She didn't acknowledge them, didn't hurry, didn't slow. She simply moved with the terrible patience of someone who had learned that rushing got people killed. As she settled into a prone position, Ross caught a glimpse of something beneath the woman's collar, the edge of what looked like dog tags, but with the name tape carefully removed. Only the metal remained, worn smooth by years of contact with skin. It was the kind of thing someone wore when they couldn't let go of who they'd been, but couldn't admit who they were. Vera's scarred hands steadied as she applied the specialized burn treatment gel, a medical-grade formula originally developed for combat casualties, but now essential for managing severe phosphorus burn scarring. The advanced silicone compounds and ceramide technology helped maintain skin flexibility despite extensive damage, allowing her trigger finger to maintain the sensitivity required for precision shooting even after 8 years of healing. The rifle settled against her shoulder like it was coming home. Mason stood behind her, arms crossed, waiting for the failure that would validate his cruelty. Chen had her clipboard ready to document the miss. The crowd of soldiers had formed a rough semicircle, their morning entertainment secured. "Target's at 300 yards, Mason announced loudly. "That's probably 3 times farther than that antique's ever shot accurately." More laughter from the crowd, but it was starting to sound forced. Something about the woman's stillness was affecting them, like watching a lake that was too quiet, too perfect, hiding depths that light couldn't reach. Vera didn't respond. Her world had narrowed to the rifle, the target, and the space between. She found her natural point of aim without conscious thought, her body remembering positions it had held thousands of times before. The wood of the stock was warm against her scarred cheek, familiar as a lover's touch. She didn't use the modern wind meters stationed along the range. Instead, she watched the grass between her position and the target, reading stories in every blade's movement. 15 to 20 mile-per-hour gusts from the southwest. But there was a corridor of calmer air about 2/3 of the way to the target, where the terrain created a natural wind shadow. She'd have to thread her shots through that corridor, timing them for the lulls between gusts. The first shot shattered the morning like a judge's gavel. The Mosin Nagant's bark was distinctive, older, deeper than the modern rifles, carrying echoes of Stalingrad and forgotten winters. Through her scope, Vera watched the target react, a small hole appearing exactly where she'd intended. "Lucky shot," Mason muttered, but his voice had lost its edge. He was rubbing that scar on his wrist again, harder now. The second shot followed with mechanical precision. Same hole. The spotters behind their scopes blinked, adjusted their focus, certain they'd missed something. But the replay on the electronic monitoring system confirmed what their eyes struggled to accept. The second bullet had passed through the same hole as the first, enlarging it by mere millimeters. By the third shot, the laughter had died entirely. The range had taken on the quality of a cathedral, that particular silence that comes when people witness something beyond their understanding. The fourth shot was poetry written in lead and physics, finding its home in that same impossible grouping. Private Sarah Kim had arrived late, drawn by the unusual quiet on a range that was typically chaos. She stood at the back of the crowd, her heart hammering as she watched the scarred woman shoot. Something about this felt important, felt like answers to questions she'd been afraid to ask for 8 years. The fifth and final shot was unnecessary from a marksmanship perspective. The point had been proven with prejudice, but Vera fired it anyway, completing the ritual, honoring the rifle that had carried her through hell and back. 5 rounds, 1 hole, 300 yards, iron sights. She safed the weapon and stood slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. The crowd parted as she turned, their faces a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Mason's face had gone the color of old paper, his hand frozen on that scar on his wrist. "Impossible," Chen whispered, her clipboard hanging forgotten at her side. "That's impossible with any rifle, let alone—" But Colonel Mitchell was already descending from the observation tower, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, urgent tones. "Code White," he said. "Yes, sir, she's here." Vera began walking back to her rifle case, but Mason stepped into her path. His swagger was gone, replaced by something desperate and cornered. "Lucky shots," he said loudly, addressing the crowd more than her. "Anyone can get lucky once. Let's see you do it at real distance, 600 yards. The challenge was ridiculous. The Mosin Nagant was a capable rifle, but 600 yards with iron sights was pushing the edge of what physics and human capability allowed. It was the kind of shot that required perfect conditions, perfect technique, and a shooter who understood their weapon at a molecular level. Vera looked at him for a long moment, and in that look, Mason saw something that made his blood run cold. Recognition. Not the vague sense that he'd seen her before, but specific, terrible recognition. His hand went to his sidearm unconsciously, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the MPs stationed around the range. 600 yards, she agreed quietly. Same target? The range safety officer should have shut this down. Standard protocol didn't allow for impromptu long-distance shooting, especially not with civilians. But something in the air had shifted, some invisible current that made everyone understand they were witnessing something beyond standard protocol. As they moved to accommodate the longer shot, Private Kim found herself drawn to Colonel Mitchell. She'd served under him briefly in Afghanistan, knew him as a man who chose his words like a sniper, chose bullets, carefully and with purpose. "Sir," she said quietly, "who is she?" Mitchell looked at her with eyes that had seen too much, kept too many secrets. "Someone who should be dead, Private, someone who sacrificed everything for her team." He paused, watching Vera settle into position for the 600-yard shot. "And someone who deserves answers that are 8 years overdue." The wind had picked up, gusting now at 20 to 25 miles per hour. At 600 yards, that wind would push a bullet off course by feet, not inches. The electronic range displays showed conditions that would challenge any shooter with modern equipment. With iron sights and a World War II surplus rifle, it should have been impossible. But Vera wasn't looking at the displays. She was reading the air itself, finding the patterns hidden in chaos. Her breathing settled into that 4-7-8 rhythm that had kept her alive through a 3-hour firefight when everyone thought she was dead. She found the sweet spot in the trigger's travel, that microscopic point where intention became action. The shot, when it came, was anticlimactic. No drama, no hesitation, just the logical conclusion of decades of training meeting immediate need. The spotters called it before the monitoring system could display the result. Impact. Center mass. She fired 4 more times, each shot a masterclass in reading wind, in understanding the conversation between bullet and air. By the time she was done, The 600-yard target looked like someone had driven a railroad spike through its center. One ragged hole made by 5 perfect shots. Mason was backing away now, his face twisted with something between rage and terror. "No," he said, the word escaping like steam from a broken valve. "You're dead. You died in Kandahar. We all saw, the report said." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and suddenly everyone was looking at Mason differently. How did he know where this woman had supposedly died? Why was he so certain about the details of a classified incident? Vera stood, brushing dust from her knees with those scarred hands. When she spoke, her accent had thickened, stress cracking the careful control she'd maintained. 3 survived because I drew their fire, Derek. 3 lived because I held that position alone for 3 hours. Do you remember their names, the ones who made it out? The color drained from Mason's face entirely. He stumbled backward, his hand fumbling for his sidearm. "You're not real? You're not her. White Death died in that valley. The phosphorus, no one could survive. Sergeant Mason, stand down." Colonel Mitchell's voice cut through the rising panic like a blade. He strode onto the range with the authority of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. "Captain Volkov has every right to be here." The name rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Captain Vera Volkov, the White Death. Ghost stories made flesh, standing in worn jeans and a field jacket, holding a rifle older than most of their careers. Some of the older NCOs remembered the whispers. A female sniper who'd come out of nowhere, trained by the Russians before defecting, bringing skills that made seasoned operators look like rookies. She'd been attached to special operations, running missions that didn't exist in places that weren't on maps. And then, 8 years ago, she'd vanished in a classified incident in Kandahar that left 4 team members dead, and 3 survivors who refused to talk about what happened. Watching Mason's face drain of color as he realizes who's standing across from him. What would you do if the person you betrayed came back from the dead? Drop a comment below about a time when someone's past caught up with them. Your stories matter here, just like Vera's truth matters after 8 years of silence. Now, watch what happens when she finally speaks. "She's dead," Mason repeated, but his voice had gone high and thin. The official report, KIA in Kandahar. January 3rd, 2016. Phosphorus burns. No body recovered. He was babbling now, revealing more than he should have known, more than any sergeant should have access to. Vera reached up slowly and pulled off her shooting glove. The hand beneath was a topography of scar tissue, white and pink and angry red even after 8 years of healing. The damage ran up her arm, disappearing beneath her sleeve. It was the kind of scarring that came from one thing only: white phosphorus, the chemical that burned until there was nothing left to burn. 78% coverage, she said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "Full thickness burns over half my body. They said I'd never shoot again, said I'd be lucky to hold a pencil." She flexed her fingers, each movement precise despite the obvious damage. "But they didn't know about the rifle, about how it waited for me, about how some things are stronger than fire." Private Kim stepped forward, her young face twisted with emotion. "You were there," she whispered. "That night. My brother, David Kim, he was on your team." Vera's scarred face softened for the first time. "David," she said gently. "He carried the radio. Always had those terrible jokes ready when things got bad." Her voice caught slightly. "He was brave at the end, braver than anyone should have to be." "You left them," Mason snarled, desperation making him reckless. "You ran. The report said what you told them to say." Mitchell's voice was cold as winter iron. He pulled out a military spec tablet, its screen showing financial records that made several watching soldiers step back. $2 million, Sergeant Mason. Deposited January 3rd, 2016, 6 hours before the ambush. Would you like to explain where that money came from? During the tense standoff, Mason's hands trembled as he checked his rangefinder, a military-grade laser targeting system with ballistic calculation capabilities designed for extreme long-range engagements. The encrypted data uplink and atmospheric sensors provided real-time adjustments that his expensive equipment couldn't compensate for the guilt now choking his ability to hold steady. The crowd had formed a tight circle now, No longer an audience, but witnesses. Several had their phones out, recording everything. This wasn't going to stay contained to Fort Carson. This was going to explode across every military network, every veterans group, every place where people still believed in honor. "You can't prove anything," Mason said, but his hand was shaking as he reached for his sidearm. "She's lying. She's always been a liar. That's why they called her Ghost. Nothing about her was real." But Vera was already moving, not toward him, but to her rifle case. She pulled out a worn manila envelope, the edges soft with age and handling. From it, she extracted a single sheet of paper. Orders, dated January 2nd, 2016, with Mason's signature authorizing a change in radio frequencies for the operation. "You change the frequencies," she said, her voice carrying across the silent range. 12 hours before the mission. Standard operating procedure said 72 hours notice for frequency changes, but you pushed it through, and then you gave those new frequencies to Anwar's network. The paper fluttered in the wind as she held it up, and every soldier there could see the signature, could see the timestamp, could see the proof of betrayal written in military black and white. "They knew exactly where we'd be," Vera continued, her accent growing thicker with each word. "Exactly when, exactly how many. The ambush was perfect because you made it perfect. And when the phosphorus mortars started falling, when David Kim was screaming for his mother, when Richardson's ammunition cooked off in the heat. Where were you, Derek? Safe at base, counting your money?" Mason's hand closed on his pistol grip, but before he could clear the holster, 30 rifles were pointed at him. The MPs had moved into position, along with every other soldier on the range. Because whatever else they were soldiers, and betrayal of that magnitude transcended every other consideration. "Don't," Mitchell warned. "You're done, Sergeant. 8 years of investigation, 8 years of waiting for her to be strong enough to come back and face you. It's over." But Mason wasn't looking at the rifles pointed at him. He was looking at Vera, at the woman he'd left to burn, and his face was twisting with something beyond fear or guilt. "They'll kill me," he whispered. "Anwar's people. If I talk, if I testify, they'll kill me. You don't understand. They're still out there, still active, still paying." Vera set the Mosin Nagant carefully in its case and stood. She walked toward Mason with that same measured pace she'd shown all morning, stopping just outside his reach. This close, he could see the full extent of her injuries. The scarring didn't stop at her neck. It covered most of the left side of her body, a testament to hours spent under fire, drawing the enemy away from the 3 survivors she'd saved. "Prison or Anwar," she said quietly. "Those are your choices now. But first, you're going to tell these soldiers the truth. You're going to tell Kim's sister why her brother died. You're going to stand here and own what you did." The wind had died down, leaving the range in eerie stillness. Even the birds had gone quiet, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Mason looked around at the faces surrounding him. Young soldiers who'd looked up to him, who'd trusted his instruction, who'd believed in the brotherhood he'd betrayed. His shoulders sagged, the fight going out of him like air from a punctured tire. "They offered so much money," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "More than I'd see in a lifetime. All I had to do was change some frequencies, delay the quick reaction force by 20 minutes. I swear I didn't know about the phosphorus. They said it would be a quick ambush in and out. I didn't know they'd trap you in that valley." "You didn't know," Vera repeated, her scarred face expressionless. "You didn't know they'd use phosphorus. You didn't know they'd block our escape routes. You didn't know they'd jam our emergency frequencies. Tell me, Derek, what exactly did you think would happen when you sold us out?" He had no answer. There was no answer that could make sense of trading lives for money. No justification that could balance 6 soldiers against $2 million. From the crowd, a CIA liaison emerged. A woman in civilian clothes who'd been waiting in the administration building. She held up her credentials, her face grim. "Sergeant Derek Mason, you're under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and murder. You have the right to remain silent." As they led Mason away, he turned back one last time. "I'm sorry," he said, the words hollow and too late. Vera didn't acknowledge him. She was kneeling by her rifle case again, running her scarred fingers along the Mosin Nagant's worn stock, the rifle that had saved her life, that had kept 3 others alive during the longest 3 hours of her existence. The rifle everyone mocked until they saw what it could do in the right hands. Private Kim approached slowly, tears running down her face. "My brother," she said. "Did he... Was it quick?" Vera looked up at her, and for the first time that morning, her control cracked. "No," she said honestly, "but he wasn't alone. I held his hand. He talked about you, about your parents. He made me promise." She stopped, swallowing hard. "He made me promise to tell you he wasn't scared. That was a lie, but it's the lie he wanted you to have." Kim sobbed, falling to her knees beside Vera. Around them, the crowd of soldiers stood in respectful silence, witnessing something raw and holy, the kind of truth that came from battlefields and never quite translated to peaceful ground. Colonel Mitchell cleared his throat. "Captain Volkov," he said formally, "the United States Army owes you an apology. Your record will be cleared, your rank restored, full back pay with interest, and any commendations." "No." Vera stood slowly, helping Kim to her feet. "I'm not Captain Volkov anymore. She died in that valley, holding a position she couldn't hold, saving men who deserved to live more than she did. I'm just Vera now, just a woman with an old rifle and too many scars." She pulled something from her jacket pocket, a small notebook, worn and stained. She handed it to Kim. "Your brother's," she said simply. "He was writing you a letter when the attack started. Never got to finish it, but what's there? It's yours." Kim clutched the notebook to her chest, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Other soldiers moved to comfort her, creating a protective circle around her grief. It was what soldiers did. They took care of their own, even when the system failed them. Vera began packing up her rifle, each movement careful and reverent. The Mosin Nagant settled into its foam cradle, like a king returning to throne. She closed the case, secured the latches, and stood. "Where will you go?" Mitchell asked. She looked at him with those dark eyes that had seen too much, survived too much. "Away," she said simply. "I came here to hear him admit it, to know that the truth would finally be told. That's enough." "It's not enough," Mitchell insisted. "There are others involved. Mason named names, contractors, officers, an entire network. We need you to testify, to help us root out. You have his confession. You have the evidence. You don't need me." She shouldered the rifle case, the weight familiar and comforting. "I spent 8 years learning to live with these scars, learning to shoot again, learning to be something other than a weapon. I won't go back to that world." She started walking toward her truck, but Ross called out, "Ma'am, Captain, what you did today?" Vera paused but didn't turn. "What I did today was remember why I left, why that life cost too much. Take care of each other, trust each other. And when someone tells you to change protocols at the last minute, ask why." As her truck's door handle felt cold under her scarred fingers, a voice called out that made her freeze. Not because it was hostile or commanding, but because it was familiar in a way that reached past 8 years of silence. "Vera." She turned slowly to see 3 figures walking toward her, 3 men in civilian clothes, but their bearing screamed military louder than any uniform could. She knew them before their faces came into clear focus. Thompson, Rodriguez, and Peterson. The 3 who lived because she held that burning ridge alone for 3 hours. The 3 who'd visited her in the burn unit when she was more bandaged than human, who'd promised to wait for her to heal. Thompson spoke first, his voice rough with emotion. "We've been looking for you for 8 years. After you disappeared from the hospital—" "I didn't disappear," Vera said quietly. "I asked you to let me go." "And we did," Rodriguez added, older now, gray threading through his hair where there had been only black. "But we never stopped watching for you, never stopped hoping you'd surface when you were ready." Peterson, who'd been a chatty kid from Iowa when she knew him, stood silent. His eyes were fixed on her scars, on the evidence of what she'd paid for their lives. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick. "We knew about Mason, not at first, but later. We started investigating on our own, off the books." Vera's hand tightened on the rifle case. "You knew?" "Suspected," Thompson corrected. His story never added up. The way the ambush was coordinated, the way our comms failed, the way the QRF got delayed. Too many coincidences. But we had no proof, and you were dead, Vera finished. Easier that way. No. Rodriguez stepped forward, his face fierce. Never easier. We've carried you with us every day, every mission, every breath. We live because you burned. That kind of debt doesn't get easier with time. Behind them, the range was erupting in controlled chaos. MPs were processing the scene, taking statements, securing evidence. Mason was already gone, transported to a holding facility, where he'd be kept under suicide watch until his full debriefing. The CIA liaison was on her phone, her voice urgent as she coordinated with agencies whose names weren't public knowledge. Colonel Mitchell approached the group, his expression careful. "Gentlemen," he said, nodding to the three men, "I should have known you'd be here. We've been trading off surveillance duty for 8 years, Thompson admitted. When she finally surfaced, we were ready." Vera looked between them. These men who'd become strangers, united by shared trauma. "Surveillance? We knew you were alive," Peterson finally found his voice. "The hospital record showed you checked out AMA after 3 months. No forwarding address, no contact information. But we knew you wouldn't just vanish, not you. So we waited, we watched, and when reports started coming in about impossible shots made with an old Mosin Nagant at civilian ranges across the country, you were hunting," Rodriguez said, "working your way through a list. We checked. Every place you showed up, there was someone connected to that night. Support staff who'd been paid off, contractors who'd supplied intel to Anwar's network. You were methodical, careful, never hurting anyone, just revealing them." Vera's scarred face showed the first real emotion since she'd arrived. Surprise. "You knew what I was doing?" "We helped when we could," Thompson admitted. "Anonymous tips to investigators, evidence that suddenly appeared in the right hands. You were the sniper, but we tried to be your spotters, even from a distance." The morning sun was climbing higher now, casting sharp shadows across the range. In the distance, more vehicles were arriving, brass from various commands, investigators, people whose job it was to untangle 8 years of lies. But here, in this small circle, time seemed suspended. "Why didn't you contact me?" Vera asked, and for the first time she sounded young, vulnerable, like the captain she'd been before the world burned her into something else. "Because you asked us not to," Rodriguez said simply. "That last night in the hospital, when you could barely speak through the pain medication, you made us promise. Let you heal in your own way. Let you find your own path. So we did. But we never forgot." Mitchell cleared his throat. "Captain, Vera. What Rodriguez isn't telling you is that these 3 men are now colonels. They've spent 8 years rising through the ranks, gathering influence, building networks. Also, they'd be ready when you surfaced. The investigation into Mason? It's been running for 3 years, waiting for the final piece. You." Vera looked at the men she'd saved, seeing them clearly now. The insignia might be gone, but the authority was there. The kind of power that came from surviving the unsurvivable and using it as fuel for purpose. "There are 47 names," Thompson said quietly. "Mason's just the first domino. The network that paid him, that coordinated the ambush, that's been profiting from dead soldiers for over a decade. We have them all. Bank records, communication intercepts, testimonies from people you helped expose. 8 years of investigation, all leading to this moment. The aftermath required extensive documentation using military-grade recording equipment with encrypted storage systems designed for classified testimonies. The specialized audio forensics technology captured every nuance of Mason's confession while maintaining chain of custody protocols that would hold up in both military tribunals and federal court, ensuring justice could finally be served after 8 years. "But we need you," Rodriguez added. "Not just your testimony, but your presence. You're the ghost they whispered about, the one who survived what couldn't be survived. When you walk into that courtroom, when they see what you paid for the truth, there won't be a dry eye or a hung jury." Vera set down her rifle case carefully, her movements betraying the exhaustion she'd been hiding. "I came here to hear him say it, to know that Kim's family would have the truth. That's all I wanted." "Liar," Peterson said gently. "You wanted justice, not revenge. You could have had that any time in the last 8 years. You wanted them exposed, their networks dismantled, their profit from blood ended. And we want to help you finish it. From across the range, Private Kim approached, still clutching her brother's notebook. Her eyes were red but determined. "My parents," she said to Vera. "They never believed the official story. They knew David would never have been caught in a simple ambush. He was too careful, too good. They've been waiting 8 years for the truth." Vera reached out with her scarred hand, touching Kim's shoulder gently. "The truth won't bring him back." "No," Kim agreed, "but it'll let them grieve honestly. It'll let them know he died because of betrayal, not failure. That matters. That matters more than you know." A black SUV pulled up nearby, and a woman in a severe suit stepped out. She had the kind of face that gave nothing away and eyes that missed nothing. "Ms. Volkov," she said, not using Vera's former rank. "I'm Deputy Director Sarah Chen, Joint Special Operations Command. We need to talk." Thompson tensed. "Sarah, she's been through enough today." "I'm aware, Colonel Thompson." Chen's voice was crisp but not unkind. "But things are moving quickly now. Mason's arrest has triggered protocols we've had in place for 3 years. Assets are being frozen, suspects are being detained, and several high-value targets are attempting to flee the country. We need her statement. We need her presence. And frankly, we need her expertise." Vera laughed, the sound bitter and broken. "Expertise? I shoot an old rifle at paper targets. I live alone in a cabin in Montana where my nearest neighbor is 16 miles away. I haven't held a command or worn a uniform in 8 years. What expertise could you possibly need?" Chen pulled out a tablet, showing a map dotted with red markers. "Every one of these locations represents somewhere you've been in the last 8 years, and at every one, you've exposed another piece of the network. You've done more to map Anwar's operations in the continental U.S. than our entire intelligence apparatus. You think you were just practicing shooting? You were running the most effective counterintelligence operation we've seen in decades. And you did it alone, with no support, no backup, no official sanction." The map showed a pattern Vera hadn't realized she'd been creating. Each shooting range, each competition, each casual visit had been selected not randomly, but with purpose. She'd been following financial trails, tracking personnel movements, building a comprehensive picture of the network that had tried to kill her team. "We know about the wall in your cabin," Chen continued, "covered in maps, photos, financial documents, connection webs. You've been running your own intelligence fusion center. The question is, will you help us finish what you started?" Vera looked at the tablet, at the evidence of her 8-year hunt laid out in digital clarity. She'd thought she was just trying to understand, to make sense of why they'd been betrayed. But somewhere along the way, understanding had become investigation, and investigation had become something larger. "Show her the file," Rodriguez said quietly. Chen hesitated, then pulled up another screen. Vera's breath caught. It was a military personnel file, but not hers. The photo showed a young man in desert camouflage, smiling at the camera with the kind of optimism that only came before first combat. "Lieutenant Michael Harrison," Chen said, "killed in an ambush outside Mosul 2 months ago. The intelligence failure that led to his death has Mason's fingerprints all over it. He was selling information right up until we arrested him today. Harrison was 23. Vera stared at the photo, at another life lost to greed and betrayal. "How many?" "Since Kandahar? 18 confirmed, possibly more. Everyone traced back to intelligence leaks from Mason's network. He didn't stop after your team. He just got more careful." The weight of it settled on Vera's shoulders like a physical thing. 8 years she'd been hunting the truth, but she'd been too focused on her own loss to see the bigger picture. Mason and his network hadn't just betrayed her team. They'd built a business model out of dead soldiers. "If I testify," Vera said slowly, "if I help you finish this?" "Full reinstatement if you want it," Mitchell offered, "or consultant status if you prefer. Your choice." "I don't want rank," Vera said firmly. "I don't want to be Captain Volkov again. But I'll help you end this, for Harrison, for Kim, for all of them." Thompson smiled for the first time. "We've got a safe house set up, secure, comfortable, fully stocked. You can work from there. Help us prep for the trials." "Trials?" Vera noted the plural. 47 names, Rodriguez reminded her. "This is going to take months, maybe years. Are you ready for that?" Vera looked down at her scarred hands, at the rifle case that had been her only companion for 8 years. She thought about her cabin in Montana, about the silence she'd wrapped around herself like armor. Then she looked at Kim, still clutching her brother's last words. At the three men who'd carried survivors' guilt like a badge of honor. At the range where Mason's betrayal had finally been exposed. "I've been ready for 8 years," she said quietly. "I just didn't know it." Chen nodded crisply. "There's one more thing. Anwar's network knows about Mason's arrest by now. They'll be moving assets, destroying evidence, possibly attempting to eliminate witnesses. We need to move you to a secure location immediately." "No." Vera's voice was firm. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right. I go back to my cabin first. There are things there, evidence I've collected, connections I've mapped. You want my expertise? It's all there, 8 years of it." "Too dangerous," Thompson protested. "If they know you're alive—" "They've known I was alive for years," Vera interrupted. "Who do you think I've been dodging at those ranges? They've sent people before. I'm still here. They're not." Chen studied her for a long moment. "You've had contact with Anwar's people?" "4 times. They thought they were hunting a ghost. They found out ghosts can shoot back." Vera's scarred face showed no emotion, but her hand moved unconsciously to her rifle case. "My cabin's defendable. I made sure of that. Give me 48 hours to pack up my work, then I'll come in." "I'll go with you," Thompson said immediately. "We all will," Rodriguez added. "No." Vera's voice softened. "Not yet. This first part, I need to do alone. I need to close that chapter before I can open this one. But after—" She looked at the 3 colonels. "After we finish this together." Chen made rapid calculations. 48 hours. We'll have surveillance drones overhead and a quick reaction force staged nearby. Any sign of trouble? There won't be. Vera picked up her rifle case. "They're scared of me now. Have been ever since I put 2 of their hunters in the ground with this old rifle. They'll wait to see what I do next before they move." "And what will you do next?" Kim asked quietly. Vera looked at her, then at the others. "What I should have done 8 years ago. Trust the people who earned it." The morning had grown hot, the Colorado sun beating down on the range where everything had changed. In the distance, helicopters were arriving, bearing investigators and officials drawn by the magnitude of what had been exposed. The machinery of justice, slow but inexorable, was beginning to turn. "Before you go," Mitchell said, reaching into his jacket, "this came for you 3 months ago. We've been holding it, waiting." He handed her an envelope, old-fashioned and sealed with wax. Vera recognized the seal immediately, the Danish military crest. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a single photograph and a brief note. The photograph showed a gravestone in a military cemetery in Copenhagen, her father's grave, the one she'd never been able to visit. Fresh flowers lay against the stone, and a small Norwegian flag was planted beside it. The note was in Danish, written in her mother's careful script. "We know you're alive. We know why you stayed away. When you're ready, come home. We'll be waiting. The rifle misses you too. Mama." Vera stared at the photo, something breaking inside her that 8 years of solitude hadn't touched. Thompson put a hand on her shoulder, steady and warm through her jacket. 48 hours, she said, her voice thick. "Then we end this?" She walked to her truck, placing the rifle case carefully in the passenger seat. As she started the engine, she saw them in her mirrors. 3 colonels who'd once been the sergeants she'd saved, a private seeking justice for her brother, a CIA official planning the dismantling of a terror network, and a colonel who'd kept faith for 8 years. She'd come to Fort Carson seeking closure. Instead, she'd found a beginning. The drive back to Montana took 14 hours. Vera made it in 12, pushing her old truck through the night while helicopters traced lazy circles overhead. She knew Chen had kept her word about the surveillance. She also knew Anwar's people were watching, waiting to see if the ghost they'd feared was finally showing herself fully. Her cabin sat in a valley between 2 ridges, positioned to give clear fields of fire in all directions. She'd chosen it carefully, paid cash, kept her name off all documents. But as she pulled up the dirt road, she saw something that made her smile grimly. 3 vehicles were already there. Thompson, Rodriguez, and Peterson had beaten her home. "Thought you said you were doing this alone," Thompson called from the porch, a cup of coffee steaming in his hands. "I said I needed to pack alone," Vera corrected, grabbing her rifle case. "Never said you couldn't make coffee while I did it." Inside, the cabin was exactly as she'd left it 3 days ago when she'd decided to drive to Fort Carson. One wall was indeed covered in maps, photos, documents, and strings connecting pieces of the network she'd been tracking. 8 years of obsessive investigation laid out like a conspiracy theorist's dream. Except every connection was real, every link verified. Peterson whistled low. "This is incredible. You've mapped their entire financial structure." "Money leaves trails," Vera said simply, beginning to carefully remove documents from the wall. "Even blood money, especially blood money. People who betray their brothers for cash tend to spend it in predictable ways. Cars, houses, mistresses, gambling debts. Every purchase a breadcrumb leading back to the source." Rodriguez was studying a section dedicated to Kandahar, photos of the team, maps of the valley, weather reports from that night. In the center, a photo of the 6 of them together 2 days before the mission, smiling and unaware of what was coming. "You kept this all these years?" "Evidence," Vera said, but her voice was soft. "And reminder of who we were before." They worked through the night, carefully packing 8 years of investigation into secure cases. Thompson had brought military-grade evidence containers, Rodriguez had a secure laptop for digitizing documents, and Peterson ran security, his rifle never far from reach. As dawn broke over the mountains, Vera stood in her empty cabin. The walls were bare now, no trace of the obsession that had driven her for nearly a decade. It looked like what it had always been meant to be, a refuge, not a command center. "Ready?" Thompson asked. She nodded, then walked to the back room she'd kept locked. Inside was a small arsenal, not the collection of a gun enthusiast, but the careful selection of someone who'd learned that being armed meant being alive. She pulled out a rifle case newer than the one holding her Mosin Nagant. "What's that?" Rodriguez asked. Vera opened it, revealing a modern precision rifle, top of the line, worth more than her truck. "Insurance," she said. "The Mosin's for memory. This is for work." They loaded the vehicles as the sun painted the mountains gold. 8 years of solitary investigation condensed into a convoy heading back to Colorado, to courtrooms and testimonies, and the slow grind of justice. But as they reached the highway, Vera's radio crackled, Chen's voice urgent. "We have a problem. Mason's dead." The convoy pulled over immediately. Vera felt something cold settle in her stomach as Chen continued. "Suicide. At least, that's what it's meant to look like. He was under constant surveillance in a cell designed to prevent exactly this. Someone wanted him silent." "The network's cleaning house," Thompson said grimly. "It's more than that," Chen replied. "We've lost 2 other witnesses in the last 6 hours. Professional hits, made to look like accidents. Someone leaked our arrest list. They're trying to burn the whole network before we can take it down." Vera stared at the mountains, her mind racing. 8 years of careful hunting, and now the prey was scattering. But something didn't fit. Anwar's network was careful, methodical. They didn't panic, which meant... "It's not them," she said suddenly. "Anwar's people wouldn't burn their own network. Someone else is cleaning up. Someone who has more to lose than money if this goes to trial." Silence on the radio, then Chen. "Explain." "Mason was middleman. He sold information, but someone had to want to buy it. Someone with access to know which operations were worth targeting. Someone high enough that exposure would mean more than prison. It would mean disgrace, loss of legacy, everything." "You're suggesting someone in our command structure," Chen said carefully. "I'm saying Mason couldn't have operated for 8 years without protection, real protection, the kind that comes from stars on shoulders." More silence. Then, "How long until you reach Fort Carson?" 3 hours. "Don't come to Carson. There's a safe house in Denver. I'm sending coordinates now. And Vera, that rifle you just loaded, keep it close." They drove in tense silence, the mountains giving way to plains, the implications of Vera's theory settling over them like storm clouds. 8 years she'd been hunting the sellers. She'd never thought to look for the buyers among her own. The safe house was a nondescript office building in an industrial district. They were met by a full security detail, faces grim, weapons ready. Chen was waiting inside, along with several officials Vera didn't recognize. "We've confirmed your theory," Chen said without preamble. 3 generals, 2 admirals, and a deputy secretary. all with financial irregularities that match payments to Anwar's network, all with access to operational intelligence that was leaked, and all currently unreachable. They're running, Rodriguez said. Or regrouping, Vera countered. These aren't people who run. They're people who attack when cornered. One of the officials, a gray-haired man with intelligent eyes, stepped forward. Ms. Volkov, I'm Director Harrison, NSA. We've been tracking communications between the suspects. There's going to be a meeting tonight, all of them in one place, probably to coordinate their response. Where? Thompson asked. That's the problem. The location's encrypted, and our best people need days to crack it. Vera felt something stir in her chest. Not quite hope, not quite vengeance, but something in between. Show me the encryption. Harrison looked skeptical, but pulled up the data on a secure terminal. Vera studied it, her scarred fingers tracing patterns on the screen. Then she laughed, low and bitter. It's not encrypted. It's Danish. Old Danish military code. My father taught me this when I was 12. She grabbed a pen, writing quickly. Grid coordinates. It's a hunting lodge in Wyoming. Isolated, defensible, with its own airstrip. I know it because I tracked one of Anwar's financiers there 2 years ago. Chen was already on her phone, mobilizing resources. Harrison stared at Vera with something like awe. How could you possibly know that? Because the deputy secretary you mentioned? He was stationed in Denmark 30 years ago, military attaché. My father was his liaison. He taught the American our codes, thinking it was a gesture of trust between allies. Her scarred face twisted. Guess he found another use for them. Within an hour, the operation was planned, a joint task force moving fast before the targets could scatter again. Vera was offered a position in the command center, safe and removed from danger. She refused. I'm going in, she said, her voice brooking no argument. Not as a soldier, not as Captain Volkov, as the ghost they've been running from. They need to see me, need to know that their money and rank couldn't protect them from the truth. Thompson, Rodriguez, and Peterson immediately volunteered to go with her. Chen started to protest, then stopped. She'd rid Vera's file, knew what this woman had survived. You didn't tell a force of nature where it could and couldn't go. The flight to Wyoming was silent except for the thrum of helicopter rotors. Vera cleaned her rifles, both of them, with methodical precision. Around her, operators checked gear, reviewed plans, prepared for what could be the biggest corruption bust in military history. But Vera's mind was elsewhere, 8 years in the past, holding a burning position while phosphorus turned the world white. The hunting lodge appeared below them just after sunset, a sprawling complex of buildings surrounded by forest. Thermal imaging showed 12 individuals inside, plus security. The kind of security that came expensive and didn't ask questions. Remember, Chen's voice came through their earpieces. We need them alive. Testimony is worth more than bodies. Vera didn't respond. She was already moving, the modern rifle in her hands, the Mosin Nagant slung across her back, old and new together, just like her. The operation was textbook perfect, security neutralized silently, perimeter secured, entry teams moving like shadows. Vera was with the primary breach team, Thompson at her shoulder, both of them falling back into rhythms they had thought forgotten. The main lodge was luxurious, all leather and dark wood and arrogance. The targets were in the great room, gathered around a conference table covered in documents. They were arguing, panic making them sloppy, when the doors burst open. Nobody move, the team leader announced. You're all under arrest. For a moment, nobody did move. Then Vera stepped forward, into the light, and the deputy secretary's face went white, not from fear of arrest or loss of position, but from recognition. Because he'd seen her file, seen the reports of her death, seen the photos of what phosphorus had done to her body. Impossible, he whispered. You're dead, the report said. Reports lie, Vera said quietly, her scarred face impassive, especially when they're written by traitors. The arrests were swift, professional. Rights read, hands cuffed, evidence secured. But Vera wasn't watching the process. She was staring at a photo on the wall. The deputy secretary younger, standing with other officers, including her father. He trusted you, she said, not loudly, but everyone heard. Welcomed you into our home. Taught you our codes because allies share such things. And you use that trust to kill soldiers for profit. The deputy secretary, former deputy secretary now, tried to speak, but Vera had already turned away. She walked out of the lodge, past the secured prisoners, past the celebrating task force members, out into the Wyoming night. Thompson found her an hour later, sitting on a fallen log, both rifles beside her, staring at the stars. He sat beside her without speaking, the silence comfortable between old comrades. "It's not over," he said eventually. "Trials, testimony, years of legal proceedings." "I know." Vera touched her scars absently. "But the hard part's done. The secret's out. The ghost is visible. Now it's just process." "You did it, Vera. 8 years of hunting, and you got them all." She shook her head slowly. "We got them. You, me, Rodriguez, Peterson, Kim, even Mason in his way. Every person who refused to let the lie stand. That's how it works, isn't it? Evil thrives in silence. But shine a light, even a small one, and the shadows run." They sat there until the helicopters were ready. Two soldiers who'd learned that survival was only the beginning of the story. That sometimes you had to burn to illuminate the truth. That sometimes an old rifle and newer scars were all you needed to change the world. 6 months later, after 47 convictions and justice finally served, Vera walked out of the D.C. courthouse for the last time. Thompson, Rodriguez, and Peterson waited outside. "What now?" Rodriguez asked. She held up a Danish envelope. "Home first, then back to teach others what I learned, how to track the money, prevent another betrayal." "The rifle range at Carson was renamed after you," Peterson said. "The Volkov range. There's a plaque. For accuracy, for truth under pressure." At the airport, they parted ways, temporary farewells between permanent allies. Vera boarded with 2 rifle cases, the Mosin Nagant, her constant companion through 8 years of hunting. As the plane lifted off, her phone buzzed. "The weather in Copenhagen is clear. Your father's rifle is waiting. Welcome home, my daughter." She closed her eyes, scarred hand on the rifle case. For the first time since Kandahar, she felt peace. Not from isolation or vengeance, but purpose fulfilled. Outside, America fell away. Ahead lay Denmark, where she'd rest before the next mission. Because there would always be another network to expose, another lie to illuminate. The Mosin Nagant waited patiently beside her, as it had through generations. Her grandfather's war, her father's peace, her own 8-year hunt for justice. Some weapons were made for war, others were made for truth. And sometimes, in the right hands, they were the same thing. The Mosin Nagant had been forged for battlefields, designed to deliver death across frozen steppes and burning deserts. But in Vera's scarred hands, it had become something more. An instrument of justice, a tool for exposing lies that killed more surely than bullets. Every perfectly placed shot at a paper target had been practiced for a different kind of marksmanship. The precision needed to pierce through years of deception, to strike at the heart of corruption, to bring down those who thought rank and wealth made them untouchable. The old rifle had found new purpose, proving that truth, like a well-aimed bullet, always found its mark. In her grandfather's hands, the Mosin Nagant had defended Stalingrad, each shot a stand against tyranny. In her father's hands, it had maintained peace, training soldiers who would protect the innocent. And in her scarred hands, it had become something neither man could have imagined, a key to unlock conspiracy, a scalpel to excise corruption from the military's heart. The same rifle that had fired through winter storms and desert heat had fired through webs of lies and networks of greed. 8 years she'd carried it from range to range, each perfectly grouped shot, mapping another node in the network that had tried to bury her alive. The rifle hadn't cared that she was scarred, that her hands shook on cold mornings, that phantom pain still traced the phosphorus paths across her skin. It had simply done what it was designed to do, deliver truth downrange with mechanical certainty. In the end, the conspirators had fallen not to bullets, but to the relentless accuracy of evidence, the careful targeting of facts, the precise elimination of alibis and false narratives. The rifle had been her only constant companion through those years of solitary investigation. In motel rooms across America, she'd cleaned it while studying financial records by lamplight. At dawn on empty ranges, she'd zeroed its scope while mentally connecting another piece of the conspiracy. Each brass casing that fell at her feet had marked another step closer to justice, another breadcrumb on the trail that led from a burning valley in Kandahar to boardrooms in Washington. She'd learned that hunting truth required the same skills as hunting men: patience to wait for the perfect moment, discipline to maintain position despite discomfort, the ability to read wind, not just the physical wind that affected bullet trajectory, but the political and social currents that carried whispers of corruption. The Mosin Nagant had been her teacher in all of this, its weight familiar as grief, its trigger pull as certain as mathematics. There had been nights when the pain was too much, when the scars pulled tight and the memories burned hotter than phosphorus. On those nights, she'd field strip the rifle in darkness, each piece a meditation, each component a reminder that broken things could be reassembled, that function could survive form. The rifle's wooden stock bore the marks of her journey, scratches from rocky shooting positions, oil stains from countless cleanings, worn smooth where her cheek had rested 10,000 times. Other shooters at civilian ranges had always underestimated her, just as Mason had. They saw the ancient rifle and scarred woman and assumed amateur, hobbyist, someone playing at marksmanship. They never understood that every shot was training for a different kind of precision, the kind needed to place evidence in exactly the right hands, to time revelations for maximum impact, to strike at corruption's heart when it was most vulnerable. The